Good evening. I would like to welcome you all tonight to the Richmond Church of Christ. Very glad that you can be here this evening, and let's all sing out. As the deer thirsts for the water, Lord, so my soul longs after you. My soul thirsts for the living God. Yes, my soul longs after you. And I pour out my soul deep within me. Deep within me I pour out my soul. Draw me deeper, Lord, in you. Draw me deeper, Lord, in you. As the deer thirsts for the water, Lord, so my soul longs after you. My soul thirsts for the living God. Yes, my soul longs after you. And I pour out my soul deep within me. Deep within me I pour out my soul. Draw me deeper, Lord, in you. Draw me deeper, Lord, in you.
Good evening. I was in Ezekiel a few days ago and I ran across something interesting. You can go with me, chapter 8 and 9 of Ezekiel. Here God shows Ezekiel a vision through a radiant angel, and he shows him in various scenes the private and hidden, what is called wicked and detestable things which happen behind closed doors, things which are done in the darkness, things that their leaders are doing. And in chapter 8, verse 6, he says, things that will drive me far away from them. A scribe, a little bit later, is asked to go through the city and mark certain inhabitants of the city with a mark on their forehead. So let's go forward 650 or so years to Revelation. Keep your finger there in 8 and 9 of Ezekiel. We'll be back. Go to chapter 14. And here is a vision that's extremely like the one we see in Ezekiel. Here we see a number of people with a mark on their forehead. They're marked in chapter 7. But I want to look at a characteristic of the people here who are marked. In Revelation 14:4, it says, they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. It's in the present tense. From Revelation, we can go into other places. Aren't we called to follow Jesus? We can see the call of Simon Peter and Andrew in Matthew 4:19, taking up our cross in Matthew 10:38 and 16:24. We can see this to the rich young ruler in Matthew 19:21 and many other verses. In Matthew 19:28, the words of Revelation 14:4 are echoed, and he said, Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. In John 12:26, we hear him say, "Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant will also be. My Father will honor those who serve me." So how do we follow? And where is Jesus going today? What is on Jesus' mind? Perhaps first that we need to have the, quote, mind of Christ, unquote. 1 Corinthians 2:16, Romans 15:5 and 6, and other verses. I use a quote often. It is, intent is prior to content. And what that essentially says is how you think determines what you do. What you think about determines what you do. Jesus in Luke 6:45 says, "A good man brings forth good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of." Yeah, I know, but you sitting there thinking you're itching. I'm going to tickle that. I'm going to scratch that itch, and I'm going to use Romans 12:2, of course. "Do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will." Now let's go back to Ezekiel chapter 9 and look at these people. It says here in verse 4, he says, "Go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and mourn over all the detestable things that are done in it." The language here implies deep emotion. Let me ask you, do you grieve and mourn about what is being done in our society? Or do we just keep our heads down? If we can just get from work to home and our family lives are great, then I don't care what happens out there. I can't help but think about Lot. Do you think Lot in his daily activities in the marketplace, buying food, taking care of business, put blinders on and just walked his way home and ignored what was going on? Was not God concerned about what was going on there? Or how about Jonah? Wasn't Jonah more concerned about his own little well-being, his comfort, more than he was about all those souls on people who did not know right from wrong? I had a rude awakening the other day. I turned on the news Monday morning, and there was a news blurb about human trafficking ring right here in Lexington, Kentucky. And I looked up some statistics. 21 million people worldwide are victims of human trafficking. The most is Southeast Asia with close to 12 million. U.S. and Canada is 1.5 million per year. And I've quoted statistics on abortion before, nearly 1 million a year. And since 1973 and the passing of Roe v. Wade, there have been 63 million infants killed. 63 million infants. If in one day we took all 2,500 babies, put them in this auditorium, and slaughtered them, and did it again tomorrow and the next day, that represents the numbers of infants that are killed each day in the United States alone. Every day, 4,000 women and children go missing or are victims of sex trafficking and human trafficking in the United States alone. Look amongst the people you're sitting around. When will it touch us? So sometimes I think we're ignorant. We live in bliss. We don't think about these things. We work on fixing our own lives. But I think Jesus is interested in something else. You may say to yourself, I have a good heart. I am grieved by injustice. by death, by immorality, by unkindness, by whatever. But if you looked really deep into your own soul, into your own heart, and see what God sees there, Jesus tells us that sin is not sin in action alone, but it's in thought. Matthew 5:28 says, "But I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart." And in 1 John 2:16 it says, "For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world." No man is sinless. Our minds are purely not capable of it. Our human desires are of the world and are condemned. Revelation 22:14 says, "Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may go through the gates in the city." So while there is injustice out there for us to rise and be mournful of, and we need to do what we can, you need to start out for your own self. You will not enter the gates of heaven without washing your robes. The words here in the end of Revelation 22 are in red, and these are some of the last words of Jesus. And I'll leave this as our invitation tonight. "I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright and morning star. The Spirit and the bride say, 'Come,' and let the one who hears say, 'Come.' Let the one who is thirsty come, and let the one who wishes take the free gift of the water of life." Come if you need us, as we stand and sing.
I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I onward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want to scale the utmost high, want to catch a gleam of glory bright, but still I pray till heaven I've found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane that I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. You may be seated.
Let me again welcome you here to our Wednesday night Bible study. Glad you could be here. Kids, let's dismiss groups. Kindergarten can go on up to their classes right now. All the kindergarten kids. Followed by the first graders. Second and third grade. And the fourth and fifth. If you missed Jack Hall, he is home battling a cold. Thankfully, nothing worse than that. Several of our senior members are having health problems. Let's pray for Norma Land. She's had a severe kidney infection, and she's fallen a couple of times recently. Tom and Winona Brown have also had some problems with falling, and Tom is going to have a spinal tap in Lexington tomorrow, so he's getting checked out. And Betty Wilson will begin rehab shortly for her situation. College students and others, we need your help setting up for preschool tomorrow. Remember Saturday night, chili supper, 6 o'clock. Bring Tums. Are there any other announcements? Let's dismiss to classes in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all the blessings that you give us. We thank you for this opportunity to be here tonight to gather together to study from your word. We ask that you be with us, help those who are teaching, those students to have open hearts and open minds. These things we ask in Christ's name. Amen.
It's howdy doody. There's an outline for tonight's class on the chair. I didn't get them out there till just now. If you want one, they're about 40, so you better hurry. They go like hotcakes usually. Say what? Oh. So, Carol, are you... Oh, I thought you were trying to... Oh, you're waiting on copies. Okay. I thought you were sitting on the ones that were already there. I couldn't figure it out. Like I'm saving them or something. I didn't know. She's making more. Okay. All right. Very good. That was a good one. I don't give you a hard time at all. Philippians 2:12 through 18 is where we are. Starting in verse 12, Paul says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you've always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to do for his good pleasure. Do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God, without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that I might rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. Yes, and if I am being poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. For the same reason, you also be glad and rejoice with me." We continue our look through Philippians at the scope and the markers. The distant scope that we are setting from this passage, verse 12, work out your own salvation. I have a few things I want to lay in front of you before we have some discussion time. Talking to the high school and middle school group at the Christian school today, we had an opportunity to think about process in studying Scripture. One of the things you have to do is sometimes when you don't understand a passage, you figure out first what it cannot be. the things that don't make any sense, wouldn't be right. We were studying today, the man one time had said, I'll follow Jesus, but let me first go and bury my father. And Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead. So I asked them, I said, was Jesus cruel? He wouldn't let the man go to his father's funeral? Well, the first thing you have to do is figure out what he's not saying. Well, Jesus is not cruel. He was not being ugly. He was not saying, you either come with me right now and let them bury him, put him in the ground, or you have no part with me. Well, that's obviously not what he's saying. It's not what he's saying, number two, because not only is he not being unkind, but what he said literally makes no sense. Dead people can't bury dead people. Let the dead bury the dead. It can't happen, right? So obviously he is not talking about a literal situation. He's talking about a spiritual situation. And what he was saying was, you say you want to sacrifice and be a part with me? Come on. What the man was saying was, I'm going to go home, take care of my parents, be around them, and when they have died and I have buried them, then I will come. And Jesus said, wait a minute. Those people are spiritually dead. They don't want to be a part of this. You let them take care of them. You come follow me. So see, it didn't say what it sounds like it said. This is one of those verses. Work out your own salvation. Well, it obviously does not mean that God is handing us some kind of carte blanche statement that says, write in there whatever you want, and I'll take it. Now, the religious world's doing that. The religious world's doing that a lot, making up their own rules about salvation. But obviously that's not what Paul is saying. But it is a scope that we ought to be looking for. There is out there this whole idea. We need to keep in mind at the far distances that I'm working out my own salvation. Let's talk about a few things that I see in this text. First of all, I want to make sure we understand what he's saying. Work out your own salvation. I think he does that by what he says in the next verse. It is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. To work out my own salvation means that I am seeking the good pleasure of God. I want to do what pleases him. Working out my salvation means putting myself in his pleasure. And therefore, I have to have God's desire. He works in me to will. It's interesting how he writes that, to will and to do. He says, I have to have God's desire, and then I have to do God's work. So, I want to please God by desiring what he desires and doing what he does. And in that way, I am working out my own salvation. Now, that's what this verse, I think, means. But how do I do that? How do I know that I am working out my own salvation? Because that's been our goal through this series, is to notice the markers from here to there that help me know that I am on track toward that goal, that scope. There are four here that I see. You may see more. Number one, I can know if I'm working out my own salvation by my ability to govern myself. Maturity. Am I maturing as a Christian? He says, not only in my presence, but much more in my absence. That's a sign of maturity, isn't it? The ability to do what needs to be done without him right there telling them what to do. That is a sign of maturity, spiritual maturity. I need to be assessing my spiritual maturity. That's one way to know that I am working out my own salvation. If I am not becoming spiritually mature, then I'm certainly not working on my salvation. One thing I want you to be considering when we start talking, how can I know if I'm being spiritually mature? What does that mean to you, becoming spiritually mature? Number two, Verses 14 and 15, another marker is I need to see my attitude and see how my attitude is. He says in verse 14, do all things without complaining and disputing. When I read that and looked at what it meant, I immediately thought about that phrase, and I wrote it here. You know how someone says, that person is always in the objective case and the kickative mood. You heard that before, right? Which, by the way, I even Googled that, and you can even find that. It's out there. They are in the objective case and the kickative mood. Now, when you hear that, you mean that person is somebody you don't want to hang around. That's what that means. That person is a mess. That person's a wreck. I don't want to be around that kind of person. Well, what do? Complaining. The word literally in Greek is to murmur. It's a word, murmur is a word that, I forget, one of you will know maybe it's a homophone. It's a word that sounds like the sound that it makes. So when people are murmur, it sounds like murmur. That's what they're doing, complaining. And they're disputing. This word disputing is a back and forth reasoning. In other words, I'm over here, then I'm over here, I'm over here, I'm over here. It's self-based reasoning. If I need to be here, I'll argue this way. If I need to be here, I'll argue this way. That's what disputing is. It reminded me of something G.T. Titus told me many years ago. He said there was a preacher that came in to interview for a job with elders, and they asked him, what is your position on X? And the preacher got up, and he closed the door, and he sat back down, and he said, now, what do you want it to be? In other words, I can argue either side. Doesn't matter to me. I'll take whichever one you want. Well, that's what this is. One who disputes argues both sides, whichever one serves self better. So these people murmur and they serve themselves. That's a part of the attitude. But the attitude ought to be blameless and harmless, verse 15. Above reproach, the word harmless means unmixed. Unmixed. In other words, it might seem like you're doing something good, but in fact you're doing something bad. You know those left-handed compliments? You ever had a left-handed compliment? A fella came out of here one time years ago, and he goes, man, I can't always tell you this. That was a great lesson. Now, he did it on purpose because it fits him. It was Lee Gentry. That's the kind of stuff he used to do, you know. So I get it. I mean, I understood it. But that's what that is. That left-handed compliment, you go, thank you. Oh, I don't know. Okay? That's what this is. Harmless is unmixed. It seems like you're doing something, but in fact, you're jabbing them when they're not looking. Okay? So I need to check my attitude. So one of the things we might want to think about is, what causes people to complain and dispute? How do we get over this self-serving attitude? Number 3, verses 16 and 17. I need to look at my commitment. If I'm going to work out my own salvation, I better be a committed person to work out my own salvation. Do you get a little nervous when you hear the phrase, work out? How many of you started the year with a new workout plan? How many are still on it? How many times have you joined and left a gym? How many pieces of equipment for exercising have you bought and never used? How many are piled up in the corner? I mean, work out. There's a commitment to working out. If you don't do it, it won't get done. It's amazing how exercise equipment in a room does nothing for you by just looking at it. It's amazing. You can't sit on an exercise bicycle and watch TV without it moving and do anything for you. Oh, I wish that were not true. So the workout, there has to be a commitment to it. Notice what he says, verse 16, holding fast to the word of life. The word hold fast is not really get a good grip on it. This word literally means pay attention, keep your ears open, keep learning, listening, thinking, be involved in it. The word of life, the presentation of it. Can you learn something new? Are you willing to be challenged? Are you willing to grow with the study of the word? But here's another one that sometimes we might overlook, verse 17. He says, if I'm being poured out as a drink offering on the service or sacrifice and service of your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with you all. Paul was glad that these people were being successful if they were working out their salvation. Part of me working out my salvation would be, am I being faithful? Am I committed to the people who faithfully have taught me? One of the things that bothers us the most when someone leaves the faith is the fact that faithful people who taught them, they've been turned on. That's a discouraging thing. Can I say in my working out my salvation that I am faithfully following faithful people? The final thing, this marker, verses 17 and 18, is joy. I have never noticed this, and today it said, I am glad and rejoice with you. For the same reason, you should be glad and rejoice with me. What's interesting is 4 times it's the same Greek word. The second time it's joy or rejoice. Then he adds a prefix to it, rejoice with. And then he comes down here and says rejoice and rejoice with. In other words, I'm glad, I'm rejoicing, and I'm rejoicing with you. And then he says, I want you to rejoice in yourself, and then rejoice with me. True joy comes when I can rejoice with you. If I am rejoicing and enjoy by myself, that's good. But the environment for working out our salvation together comes when I can rejoice, and then I can also rejoice with you. When we connect in joy, it really helps us grow working out our salvation. So the 4 markers that I see Paul laying down in this text are that I need to be able to be mature and govern myself, have the proper attitude, have a great commitment, and be a joyful person. So, first thing to think about, are there other markers or concepts that you see? Number 2, how can I know that I am becoming mature? What kind of things should I be looking for in this self-governance idea? Number 3, what causes people to complain and dispute? Why would that even be a problem? And how do we help resolve that or stop that? And this commitment level, to be committed not only to the Word, which we all agree, but why is it important to be committed to faithful people who have faithfully taught? And then we might want to talk a little bit about the joy with each other. There's a lot in there that we could talk about. So, what thoughts have come to your mind about this text on scoping out, working out your own salvation? You might even talk about what that means as far as you're concerned. Go ahead, Eric.
From a different translation,
Good.
when you read it,
You know, we ought to start every week with the Eric version. Once it's read, we have the Eric version read. Read verse 12.
verse 12. My dear friends, you always obeyed what you were taught. Just as you obeyed when I was with you, it is even more important for you to obey now that I am not present. So you must continue to live in a way that gives meaning to your salvation. Do this with fear and respect for God. And whenever you look down at verses 17 and following stuff, that continue to live in such a way that gives you meaning to your salvation totally makes sense. Because whenever you get down in verses 16 and following, it basically says, and you offer them, well, let's start with 15. It says, but you are living with evil people all around you, who have lost their sense of what is right. Among those people you shine like lights in a dark world, and you offer them teaching that gives life. So I can be proud of you when Christ comes again and show that my work was not wasted and I ran the race and won. Your faith makes you give your life as a sacrifice in serving God. Maybe I will have to offer my own life with your sacrifice, but if this happens, I will be glad and will share my joy with all of you. You should be glad and share your joy with me. And I think there, verse 17 and 16 and stuff, where it talks about that we are a bright and shining light in this dark world and around people who need that light on a constant basis. Basically, that our faith is a sacrifice, a living sacrifice in serving God. When you think about it, when we obey the gospel, to make our salvation be meaningful, I know one of the things when I first obeyed the gospel is I had a fire in my heart that I just wanted to tell everyone around me that this is what you need. And really, when you think about that, really as Christians, that's one of our key jobs and roles. And what better meaning could our salvation mean than to bring others to that wonderful thing?
That's really good. I really like the give meaning to your salvation. Work out your own salvation is giving meaning to it. In other words, you obeyed the gospel, you came into a saved relationship with God, and so you are working it out. You are giving meaning to what you just did through this life that you're living. That's really good. I like that. Other thoughts?
Each one was called a home.
Yes.
They're each a little bit different. Their purpose is to give us shelter, a place to live, to be comfortable. Even if the designs were the same, there's still going to be some little differences. What this is going to have. We each have a spiritual home that God has already prepared for us.
Good.
And He said, "Here's what you do." He doesn't do every detail. It's a personal thing. Just like the homes are. Different things in the homes, different rooms, colors, whatever. But they all provide the same purpose of shelter, just the way God's home provides us a spiritual shelter.
No, I think that's a really good analogy because there are ways even to draw some specifics from that. We all have homes to go to, and there are expectations that a real home has, no matter what the differences are. Real homes will have security. Real homes will have peace. Real homes will have discipline. Real homes will have love and attention, all of those things. But it comes out in a different way in your house, or it looks different over here. But it still, if it's a real home, has those things. So God's home is a place that's real. And work out your salvation for me, for each one of us, with talents and abilities. We're working it, we're giving meaning to it in our own way, and yet being true to the principles that are true for everybody. That's good. The idea is you work it out individually with what is who you are, who we are as individuals, and yet we're all tied to the same over-guiding principles that don't change. That's good. Go ahead, John.
So this working out is, in light of our safe position, it's our response.
That's it.
It's our expression of
That's right.
that. You know, it'd be quite different if he said, work for your salvation with fear and trembling.
Good point.
That would be so much the opposite of what he's trying to say.
That's a great point. He is not saying to work on your own salvation. He's working with or in or work out. Make a response to what you claim, which is, I'm a saved individual. Good.
My response to my safe state is going to be a little different than yours or Dwight's. We're going to express ourselves probably because we have different abilities, for one, but we also see things a little differently.
Sure. That's a great point. That's good. Go ahead.
What relationship is verse 13?
To that idea? Yeah. I think that's a good question, because if we're doing for his good pleasure, then what I am choosing to do, even if we see things differently, we see that both of them must please God. If they don't please God, then one of us is wrong. That's right. Go ahead.
This says, for it is God who works.
Yep.
So how does God work in us?
Well, are you threatening to do what you decided not to do last week? Is that what you're trying to do, Mark? Now, come on. He decided to bring something up afterwards that he chose not to during, and that's fine. But I could simply say, oh, Mark will be dealing with that in about 2 weeks when I make him teach. So how does he do it specifically? You know, that's a question that we can argue or hammer it out. But the point is, he is working in us. Not only is he working in us, he is providing not only the will, but the action. And we must be open to his guidance, as it were, I think, through the Spirit that lives within us.
I think that's true. My point. That seems to be one of the things, in my experience in faith, is always sort of not talked about.
Oh, avoid it. Like the plague.
Yes. But if you put that in context, if we have the Spirit of God in us, and Acts 2 says it's a promise, if that is in us, then these other things, these markers that you were talking about, it's going to be much easier to do these things if we allow God, for lack of a better way to say it, free reign in our lives, than to do what Paul said we don't do, quench the Spirit, and do their own.
There you go. That's good. Good. So to let God work in us means we let God do it in his way, through his means. That's good. Lisa?
I have thought of this in relation to 2 Timothy 2:15.
Good.
And what struck me about verse 12 here is you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now in my absence. And what I relate to more than anything is, how many times have you been in a math class and that teacher's up there showing you how to work a problem, and you're thinking, oh, this is easy, I can do it. And then you get home, away from the teacher, and you can't figure it out. You have got to work it out yourself and read that book, go back over the notes, and figure it out for yourself what's going on in the absence of that teacher.
That's a great illustration. And it calls to mind Hebrews 5:12. When the writer is saying, the time you want to be teachers, you have need for somebody to teach you. It fits the same context. The people of that day defined, one of the ways they defined maturity was, can you teach yourself? If you always have to be taught, you're not mature. Can you teach yourself? It's not a matter of just having the right answers. It's a matter of teaching yourself, knowing how to arrive at answers. Excellent point. Go ahead, Louis.
All elders,
Right.
not all preachers. We can work out how we best can serve the Lord to be pleasing to Him.
And we should. And that's the point. The path that you are on and that I'm on and that you are on and you're on, not same path with respect to the means, the method, the talent, those opportunities, but it's the same path as it relates to God and pleasing Him. So we cannot expect a funnel approach where we're all fed into a funnel and we all become exactly the same. It can't happen. But we can all express our salvation consistent with God and in harmony with God's people with whom we have a working relationship, individually and yet together, working out our salvation. Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say, to a certain extent, that's very true. I think that's why in Corinthians you have it broken down that because I'm not basically using the analogy of a human body that each of us has our own part and role to play. And that's very much true. However, there are some things that we're all expected to do regardless of our past.
Good.
One of the things I think that always stands out to me is, and I'm stepping on my own toes as well as probably everybody else's, but more often than not, we have opportunities to preach and teach, and we kind of just let that lay at your feet or the elder's feet or someone else's feet. Whereas when we see and look back at things, it's the responsibility of each and every one of us to evangelize. So, and that's part of that verses 16 and following, where it talks about we're a light in a dark world, and we're supposed to be spreading that word. And that's something that, regardless of our talents and abilities, something we should all do. Maybe we do it differently. Maybe we talk to friends, and maybe we're not preaching in the pulpit, but we all have the responsibility to preach Christ.
But even in that, we do it differently, each of us. But I want to, Rhonda, I don't know if you knew this or not, because this fits his point, preschool. Did you know that Calvin and Hank were here Sunday? I didn't even get to see them. Calvin was here. He was one of our favorites. Hank is here now, brothers. Just those kids are just fantastic. Well, they came Sunday because of the Explorers. And I don't know if did they come to class, or did they just come later and look at it? Do you know? Right? Yeah. Yeah, I took him up there. Man, I wish I had talked to them, because they're two of my favorites. But so what you're saying, Eric, is that is an opportunity for evangelism through children. And there are some children who've been coming with other children because of the excitement and the things that's going on. Preschool is an evangelistic opportunity. Whatever we do can be, wherever you are, there are ways of being evangelistic, as Eric is saying. You don't do it my way, you don't do it that way, but you do it your way. And so those things we're all responsible for, but in our own unique way. It's exactly right. Very good. Somebody talk to me about this maturity thing, this self-governance deal. How can we as a congregation help people to be self-governing, to be mature spiritually? What kind of things do we need? What needs to happen? Any thoughts on that?
Everybody's trying to do this online.
Okay.
And it keeps you honest. You're going to get out there and read.
Good.
Try to keep up. For me, that is a lot. I didn't read Bible in years, 2 years, so I got it done.
There you go.
Yeah, but this keeps you more accountable. And if someone else asks a question, I probably already thought that same thing. You know, there's a lot of this thing. You're learning by using that. That's something that we help each other with.
Yeah.
Keeping each other honest and in the Word, which means you are going to mature. It keeps you going back.
That's
That
good.
is a sign of maturity.
Chris, how many are on there now? 142 or something? You don't know? Somebody told me at one time it's 142 or something like that. We have this Facebook Bible reading thing that a bunch of us are doing. So, and someone mistakenly thought tonight that I was on Facebook because of that. No. 127. Thank you. 127 people. No, not at all. Not at all. Well, it was offered as an opportunity to go and check through the teacher, so that made it perfectly acceptable. So one way is we help with self-governance and maturity by group, if you will, positive peer pressure to do better at reading. I like it.
Sometimes already about teaching. When we reach the point where we can teach what we have learned,
Yeah.
that is a sign of maturity.
It is. When I can teach what I have learned, that's exactly right. I have to say, when I figured that out in Hebrews 5 and 12 about their idea was to be able to teach yourself, not be taught. I've always preached it that you need to be a teacher. And that's not the main point of that passage. The main point is you need to teach yourself. But if you teach yourself, by definition, you can teach somebody else. If you know how to get there, then you can. But you can do it in your way or in another way. But that's the concept. Yes, I think you're exactly right.
You can talk to someone who disagrees with you and not be upset.
Oh, I like that. When you can talk with someone with whom you disagree without being upset, that's spiritual maturity. Oh, I think so. Absolutely true. Yeah, John?
How you live and behave when no one around even knows you.
Sure.
Completely anonymous.
Exactly right. When you are anonymous, are you still God's person? Because when you're anonymous to everybody else, you're still not anonymous to him anyway. So, good sign of spiritual maturity. Anybody else? Yes, Debbie.
I hope this doesn't deviate too far from your
Oh, it's not possible. Not even possible.
rewarding or acknowledging when a child does something that is a good Christian act.
Oh, that's good.
That, you know, we notice kids when they get good grades, we notice when they achieve things in athletics, but they need an encouragement to know that it really is not just a private thing, but that it's noticed when they do things that is in God's Word.
That's really good. Sure. So if we can help them learn and grow by paying attention to when they do something, it's positive reinforcement. Yeah, I did it today. I took 3 cups of donut holes and set them on a table at school. And I said, there's your goal if you're good today. Ooh, they were good. Good. Now I can come back and say, if you can be good for donuts, you can be good just to be good. So you can't fool me no more. Well, that's not true, but go ahead, O. Good point.
The last few weeks, I go to physical therapy in Lexington, and every one of those folks knows where I stand. And it's not in a harsh way.
No.
But they've all been invited to church. But the main doctor was there today, and we talked about the world and how bad it's shape. And I said, God's got this. He said, you're right. So we look for opportunities to spread the word.
That's really good. I did it at lunchtime today. I had recorded this show, the series that I wanted to watch. And lo and behold, right in the middle of it, main character are 2 moms and a daughter. So I canceled the recording and sent an email to CBS. It made me feel better, you know. Go ahead.
But I know
Bad reputation for good reasons. Okay,
I
well,
mean, it's got bad reputation.
I understand.
Stay with me. But Pam puts it up on there, scripture. And I look for it. Jim Chandler does the same thing. I'm reading a book now called Go and Sin No More. And there's 20 points of what sin can do to your life. And I post those up.
Good.
One at a time. To me, there's a lot of avenues open there that you can help people.
That's good. So looking for opportunities is to improve self or to help others is a sign of maturity. I like that. That's exactly true. Somebody better be writing these down. Go ahead. Contentment. Oh, now that you said that, I got to bring it up because I try to use it. When I learn something, I try to use it in public so I don't forget it. Because I forgot it the first time when it was said. Presley, a number of 2 or 3 months ago, made a statement in class that was brilliant. And I had to go back and get her to word it exactly right. It's about contentment. You know, we talk about, Paul said, I've learned whatever state I am to be content. And we try to equate contentment with satisfaction. And she said, oh no. This is her statement. She said, if I'm satisfied, I don't want any more. If I'm content, I can't wait to get more. Ooh. Did you get goosebumps with that one? I wish I could take credit for it. But that's extremely good. Satisfied, when you've had all you want to eat, you can't eat anymore. But if you are content, there's always the desire for more because I like it. I'm content. That's a great way to judge spiritual maturity. Am I wanting more? Not less of the Lord. Am I wanting more? That's an interesting, I wonder how that would play out. If people want more, how would that play out in the life of this church? One of the ways, I'm going to tell you, is Howard Mead's going to give us more. He's got a program laid out for intentional fellowship, the likes of which we've not seen. And if you want more, if you can't get enough of being around good people, the more opportunities are going to be there if you want to take advantage. Go ahead.
Client who had every right to complain about her health. She had cancer, was in pain. And she had this saying, and it was, instead of waiting for the storms to pass, I bought an umbrella.
I bought an umbrella. Instead of waiting for storms to pass, I bought an umbrella. It's good. Well, that's a good way to live life if we all could do that. Go ahead, Ralph.
I agree that being satisfied means that, you necessarily need more. It could be satisfied. I got the job done and it meets the boss's expectations. I'm satisfied. It doesn't mean I want more.
And yet you want more jobs to do. Well, I understand. And as John said, we don't have to agree to be loving brothers. That's right. I don't know if it's the same or not, but yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's Exodus today. I'm doing Bible reading, but not that order.
Yeah.
But I've never noticed this before, but when the grain offering was made to God, if it was a sign of service to God and rejoicing and praising God, you poured oil on it, and frankincense on it. But for a sin offering, it was a grain offering. You don't pour oil on it. You just use the grain. So that made me think of verse 17. If you're pouring out yourself, that's a sign of praise to God. You're glad and you're rejoicing.
That's good.
If you're not pouring yourself out, you're probably sinning.
In fact, didn't we sing that song? I pour out my soul deep within me. That's pour ourselves out. That's a good point. That's a good way of putting that. A good spiritual maturity is giving more of self, really pouring yourself out. That's good. That's good. Anybody have a 2-minute close? A 1-minute close? Or do you want 2 minutes off? Any thoughts? Okay. We'll be in chapter 3, 1 through 11 next week. It's on there for you, so you won't, hopefully, forget it. We'll finish for tonight. Thank you.